Okay, hi everyone. It's Dr. Leola here, and this is a fairly quick but kind of expansive video about Twitter bots in order to prepare you all for your final coursework assignment before kind of the final exam, our final project. We're not doing an exam, but our final kind of piece of coursework for DCD 200, and that is creating a Twitter bot. So like the e-poem, which you just did, the Twitter bot is the second kind of focal area of our electronic literature unit that's closing out the class. And just like the e-poem, we're going to primarily focus on building as a way to explore these kinds of principles and the way that this works. So in this video, I'm basically going to try to get you set up for doing that successfully and with minimal stress. So I'm going to talk first a little bit about what a Twitter bot is, just generally speaking, how it fits in with ELIT and how it fits in with some of the ideas we've been exploring this semester. I'm going to talk about basically how a Twitter bot works, to kind of give you an idea of like a design process and a thought process for understanding the logic behind a Twitter bot. We'll talk about how to actually design one, and again, kind of what kind of process that you can follow. And I'm actually going to take you through the basics of creating a simple bot in this video. We will talk about an important thing, which is making sure that the bots you create are ethical, right, and that they do act ethically. I'll explain a little bit about the language you'll be using, which is called tracery for this project. But again, this is not primarily a tracery tutorial video, so I'll talk a little bit about it, but really you should plan to use the tutorials linked on Moodle. Those are much more expansive, much more detailed, and much more kind of focused on actually getting you working with tracery. And then finally, I will just say a little bit about the assignment that you have. It's all kind of built out on Moodle, so I'm not going to just repeat all of that, but I want to focus on a few kind of things about working with Twitter and just make it kind of clear to you the extent to which you should build this bot. So like how much is required from you and so on. Okay, so we'll start with our first area, which is what is a Twitter bot? So this is a kind of text generator, and we looked briefly at text generators in the early electronic literature survey video that I sent 2 weeks ago. And a text generator, you'll remember, is a computer program that basically produces or generates text. So thinking more kind of expansively about literature and the digital humanities and kind of where this fits in, this is something that really challenges how we understand the act of writing and the act of authorship and creative text-based activities, right? So we tend to think of something like creative writing or poetry or short fiction or whatever. We tend to think of that as like a very human pursuit. And it's, you know, part of our history of how we express our cultures and so on. And so the text generator kind of is the next step to that, which is instead of the human writing a poem or writing a story or whatever, the human instead writes a computer program, and then the computer program actually writes the content. So that's kind of where this fits in with our broad questions of DH and understanding what digital humanities is, and then also where it fits in as a form of electronic literature, right? So this is writing a computer program that writes text. And to be clear, when I say text, I'm meaning text really broadly. So it can mean like traditional written text that you normally encounter in like an English class or when thinking about literature. But as a lot of the example Twitter bots that I sent you kind of show, it can also mean visual texts, right? So emoji-scapes like the sheriff bot, or even images, or sometimes even sounds. So for this particular class, we are going to focus on traditional written text or using emojis. And I strongly encourage you to incorporate emojis into your bots if you're kind of interested in how those output, because that's kind of a cool like additional thing to add to your bots. But in any case, we're going to focus on that mainly because these other media, like getting a Twitter bot to generate images or to generate sounds, that's a little bit more complex coding and programming than what we're going to do in this class. So if you want to explore those possibilities outside this class, I fully like endorse that desire. But for this class, and especially right now while we're learning at a distance, we're just going to keep it as simple as possible with basic text and emojis. I should say and or emojis. Okay, so now let's get into our next topic, which is how does a Twitter bot work? So a Twitter bot basically works based on three main parameters that you as a designer or a coder need to kind of think about to build a bot. So the first thing is that there's always some kind of formula for text or for the content to be produced within. And the formula has specific areas in it that can be changed and where you can add different words or different images or different emojis or whatever to make it work. So for instance, if we're going to make a bot based on like some memes, for instance, we might choose this one, which I don't even know if this is popular anymore, but it is one of my favorite webcomics. But this kind of like do all the things meme, which has now kind of become a X all the Y. Right, so anytime we see this meme, it always follows that formula, which is X or do, eat, see, play, read, whatever, all the Y. And Y is always like things, movies, cake, cookies, and so on, right? So that's our formula there, is this X all the Y. As another example, we could look at this meme, the most interesting man in the world, and he similarly follows a formula, right? Which is, I don't always do X, but when I do, Y. Right, based on that commercial of I don't always drink beer, but when I do, it's Dos Equis. So this is another one where you can kind of see that it always follows a pattern, right? Which is I don't always do something, but when I do, something else. So this is kind of the memosphere, and this is why you don't have to make a meme bot, but that's one, because memes always follow some kind of formula, it can be a slightly easier space to kind of to look at for imagining what it means to generate within a formula. But some other formulaic things are something like certain forms of poetry. So for instance, haikus always follow the formula of 5-syllable lines, 7-syllable line, 5-syllable line. So for the haiku bot that I built with students in DCD 200 last semester, that's one where everyone provided some 5-syllable lines and some 7-syllable lines, and then we just taught the bot that formula so that it produces these haikus as it goes along. And then finally, to think even kind of more broadly about what a formula can be, I don't know if this is a game that you guys play anymore, but these old things that used to be called Mad Libs, where you would get a story with certain words kind of cut out, and it would tell you what words to kind of fill in. So maybe there'd be like a noun broken out, and you would provide a noun, and then a verb would be broken out, and you'd provide a verb, right? And it would give you these kinds of rules for filling in content. And that's kind of a version of an early story generator, right? That's based in paper, because you just randomly write in the words that can go in, but according to a certain formula, right? And in this case, that formula is the way that that English grammar works, right? That there's only certain words that can fit in each of these spaces according to the rules of grammar, right? So this is the first step, right? Is the formula or the rule that your generator needs to work within. It can be, you've kind of seen a few different examples now. So the next step is the expansions, or the things that it actually fills in for X or Y in these formulas. And these can be individual words, they can be whole lines of text, they can be certain parts of speech, right? They can be emojis, right? There's lots of things that can be filled in for the expansions. But again, if we just focus on our X all the Y example, which is the meme that or the bot that I'll be building in this video, we know, for instance, that X needs to be a verb, and it can't just be like any verb. It needs to be a verb that's specifically like an order, like a directive order. So do this, eat that, say this, read this, watch this, right? And so on. So we know it has to be that kind of verb. It can't be like eaten, or it can't be ate, for instance, right? We also know that Y needs to be a plural noun, right? So it can be things, cookies, words, books, Netflix shows, birds, phones, whatever, any kind of plural noun. So we could simply start our formula with saying X is verbs, Y is plural nouns, and kind of let it go. But we can kind of quickly see that we might want to be a little bit more specific or a little bit more focused than just a plural noun for Y. Because we could quickly generate something like eat all the Netflix shows, or say all the books or watch all the words or something. And like this works grammatically, but it doesn't really work culturally, or it doesn't really make sense. So we might want to be a little bit more specific about certain nouns that work with each verb, right? So we might want to say, okay, what are some things we can watch? Well, we can watch Netflix shows, we can watch things, we can watch movies, we can watch episodes, we can watch Tiger King, we can watch sitcoms, we can watch musicals, right? And so on. Then we might want to say, what are some things we can eat? Okay, we can eat cookies, we can eat chicken, we can eat vegetables, we can eat fruit, we can eat cake, we can eat cheese, we can eat French fries, right, and so on. Right, and we could just kind of fill that out. And then now we can be a little bit more focused in what our bot generates, and it can generate a lot more things that actually make sense, right? So now it might say, watch all the episodes, eat all the chips, eat all the cheese, watch all the Tiger King, right, and so on. But it'll kind of focus what nouns actually follow from what verbs so that it makes sense, right? Okay, and then our final thing that we want to keep in mind for determining how it works, we've got our formula, we have our expansions, or the things that can be generated. The next thing and the final thing we want to set is the frequency of generation, which is basically a fancy way of saying we need to know how often our bot should tweet, right? So when should it share a new tweet or generate a new tweet out into the world? And this is one that Bots Done Quick, which is the program that you'll be using to host your bots and to build your bots in. It makes it really easy for you to decide a time. You just choose it from a drop-down menu and kind of go. But I am going to recommend, having done this assignment quite a few times now, I'm going to recommend that you do something 3 hours or longer. So 6 hours, 9 hours, whatever, but no faster than 3 hours, because Twitter may shut you down if it's faster than that. And it tends to especially shut you down if it's set to something like 10 minutes or 30 minutes. So I'd say 3 hours or slower, which does mean that you'll need to kind of build a bot and then leave it for a day to kind of check back in and see how it's doing, or that you'll want to generate a lot from Bots Done Quick to make sure that all your formulas work. And I'll talk about that more in just a little bit. Okay, but those are your basic 3 things: your rules or formula, your options to generate within, so the words to substitute, and then how often to generate. Okay, so designing one, how can you go about designing one? So it's really the workflow that I just walked you through, right? So think of some kind of topic or area that you're interested in. Imagine statements that work within this broad topic or area. What's the formula for the meme? What kinds of images could you repeat with emojis? What kind of phrase could your bot say? So as another example, last fall in my DCD 201 class, which is coding for the humanities, we built a Halloween costume suggestion bot. So this is one where there's not really a clear formula, because as there is like a meme or something, but this is one where the bot basically says some version of like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if you dressed like X? Right, and then we generated different greetings, different costume ideas, different ways of saying, wouldn't it be cool if, and so on. So you can kind of check that out here. But you can see that that's one that just kind of is phrases that a Halloween suggestion bot might say, rather than a strict formula, right? So you'll imagine your formula or your statements, your rules. Then you'll identify places you can substitute different words, because not every word can be substituted out. So again, if we look back at our X all the Y example, we need to kind of keep that all the in the middle. Otherwise, the meme doesn't work anymore, right? So we can't change all to like some of the, or we can't change all to many. We have to leave it as all the, because that's kind of how the joke works, right? Same with the most interesting man example. We can generate within, we can't generate within I don't always, like that has to be there, right? But we can generate what comes after what I always do. And we have to keep, but when I do, right? So those things need to kind of be fixed, and then the other parts can be generated within. So you need to identify that. Where are places within your phrase that you could substitute different words, and where does it need to be consistent and to be fixed? And this is something that may take a couple of generations. Like you might need to kind of write some code, play around, see what gets produced, and then go back to the drawing board. And that's okay, right? That's totally fine to have to kind of do that iterative process. Okay, then once you've kind of decided where you can substitute words, then you want to determine your list of alternatives, right? And this is in some ways the hardest part because it's just like thinking of words. But there's, you can use the internet for that. You can use friends and family for that. You can crowdsource this information. But what you want to know is you do want to make sure that you're creating a list of words that works logically within your formula and grammatically, right? So just as we did for X all the Y, we need X to be like a directive command verb, and we need Y to be a plural noun. Otherwise, it does not work grammatically. And then we need to make sure that the Y is something that actually can be done by the verb X. And if not, then it doesn't work logically, right? So you'll need to do that same kind of thing. What works logically and what works grammatically. And then basically you'll write your code and you'll send your bot out into the world. But of course, we want to make sure that the bot you're sending out into the world, because it's operating publicly on Twitter where anybody can interact with it, right? We do want to make sure that it's ethical. And bots generally kind of get something of a bad reputation for being these like inherently unethical things. And that's of course not true, but they certainly can do unethical activities. For instance, spamming people or interacting with users they shouldn't, maybe trolling for data. Some examples of like particularly problematic bots are this pair of bots where one of them would steal credit card information whenever people would share a credit card online, and then distribute it, right? So if people needed a credit card, they could just easily steal from someone. Or this bot, which tried to warn people of this, but that because it was interacting with users without their consent, it actually got shut down pretty quickly. Another fairly famous example is Tay. She's an AI learning bot produced by Microsoft. And basically, they just sent her out into the world to learn how to communicate with people. And within 24 hours, had to shut her down because she became this like hugely racist, homophobic, misogynist, kind of white supremacist bot. So that's, of course, like pretty unethical. And so we do want to make sure that when you're making a bot that you stay ethical. So some guidelines for that for this class. Three main guidelines. Number one, check your rules and formulas and make sure that you don't tweet something offensive, right? Whether accidentally or otherwise, just make sure that it's not going to accidentally produce something really problematic. So whether that's like a racial slur, or I once had a student who built a bot that was kind of jokingly suggested that people kill themselves if they couldn't pass their finals. And that's just, it doesn't really land, right? So we don't want to do stuff like that. So be careful about, think critically about the context of your bot and how it's circulating and what could be considered problematic to see on someone's timeline. Number two, make sure to be clear that your bot in the account is not human, right? So name it in the Twitter handle, name it as a bot, or in the name, or in the profile description, describe it as a bot. You can see in the Twitter that I've set up for the X all the Y bots, it says bot multiple times because we just want to be sure that nobody is accidentally thinking of our bot as a human, because that can set up some kind of ethical gray areas. And then finally, and this is a general rule, is not to don't let your bot interact with users unless they interact with your bot first. So in Tracery and CheapBots Done Quick, there is an option to create a reply script. And basically what that would do is that if users tagged your bot, then it would reply with some kind of phrase. And this is perfectly fine because the user initiates the interaction, right? So just make sure that your bot does not initiate interaction with users unless they interact with your bot first. Okay, so now to walk you through working with Tracery and actually kind of working with Twitter, I actually want to I'm actually going to build a simple bot here following the X all the Y or do all the things model that I talked about in a couple of the examples previously. So in preparation for this, I created a Twitter account for this bot. So you can see this is the profile page. Nothing's happened yet. except that I've built the account. So I've added a handle, which is at all the things bot. The name is all the things ? And the description is a simple bot trying to do all the things. So first I want to just draw your attention to the fact that I've named multiple times on the Twitter account that this is a bot. So nobody comes to this and accidentally thinks that it is a real person or that something else is kind of weird about it. So that's, again, one of our models of creating an ethical bot, is that we make it really clear that it's a bot that we're working with. Okay, so once I've logged into Twitter with my bot account, I'm going to navigate to Cheap Bots Done Quick. And then I'm going to click the Sign In with Twitter button right here. On your screens, this may look a bit different. I was just logged in with a different bot. So I've logged out, and now I'm going to log in with this one. So you do want to make sure, as I said, that you are logged in with the correct account on Twitter, and not like your personal account or not something else, because it's going to link to whatever account you're logged into. So now I'm going to sign in with Twitter. And so now we have this new view of Cheap Bots Done Quick. And this is the space where we're actually going to write our code. You don't need to really worry about anything up here. I mean, you're welcome to look at it, but you don't need to worry about it. You're going to just focus on this area down here. So this text box is exactly where you're going to write your code that's going to run your bot. Down here, this is where you can generate tweets by clicking on this, this arrows button. If you click tweet, it's going to go out into your Twitter account. So this one is how you can kind of see how things are working without sending it to Twitter. Here is where you'll decide how often to post. So I'm going to set mine to every 6 hours. No, we'll do every 3 hours. I'm not going to create a reply, so I'm going to leave that right there. And I am going to go on and share this code. So that means that now, if you put in this URL into any kind of web browser, cheapbotsdonequick.com/source/all-the-things-bot, you will see the code that I'm writing today. So this is about how yours should look at the bottom when you're done. You'll set your frequency, and then you'll set share. Otherwise, though, everything else is kind of up to you. So let's come back up here, and we'll talk a little bit about how tracery works. So tracery is a JSON grammar, and the specifics of that really aren't important. For the purposes of this class, you're welcome to think of it as your coding language that you'll be using to build your bot. And you should notice already that it has a few requirements for syntax. Everything needs to be done within these curly braces. We've got these quotation marks, we're using colons, we're using square brackets, right, and so on. And I'm going to explain to you kind of the logic of how all of this works. But again, the tutorials really do a better job of walking you through this than what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to go fairly quickly just to show you how I'm going to build the X, all the Y bots. So if you're kind of following this video and you leave and you're still not really sure what to do, go to those tutorials, okay? So tracery is basically set on a logic of rules and expansions. So rules are all named out here. So right now we have 3 rules. We have one rule called origin, one rule called alternatives, and one rule called completely different. Okay? So when the bot tweets, it's never going to tweet the names of these rules. It's never going to tweet origin. It's never going to tweet alternatives. It's never going to tweet completely different. What it is going to tweet is whatever is inside of these square brackets. Okay? So this is the stuff that's actually going to show up in the content of your tweet. And we can see that down here, right? That we have, and now for something completely different, which is generating from completely different, and now for something completely different, right there. If we redo it, this says this is a generated tweet. So we can see this is, and then right here, a generated, and then tweet. Okay, so this is just to kind of clarify what it's pulling from, and that it's not pulling from, it's never going to tweet these words. So you can name this whatever you want, but there are a few kind of rules to follow within here. So the first one is that origin is a special rule, and it has to be called origin, and it has to look like this. And basically origin is where the program is going to look for what to produce first, right? So your formula should go in the origin rule. But keep in mind that the origin rule syntactically works like any other rule. So if you want to have multiple statements, so in this case we have the statement, this could be a tweet. We have the statement, this is alternatives tweet. And then we have a statement completely different. So in that case, that's what will come out of your origin in your tweet. So for this bot, the X all the Y bot, we really just want one phrase to come from the origin, and that is the phrase, do all the things. So I'm just going to start by typing that in here, do all the things, right? So now you'll notice that our output has completely changed to what's in the origin, right? And we can generate and generate, and it's always just going to say that because I haven't set anything for how the computer should understand changing different words, right? And that's, of course, the next part of our Twitter bot. But what I am going to notice directly from this origin is that I maybe want this to be capitalized, that do. And then I have a small typo, which is that things should, of course, be things. So we'll just change that right here. Do all the things, right? So now I fixed it. So now my formula is set. But looking at my formula, I need to decide what words I actually want to change out to generate new content, right? And as we discussed before, those words are do and things, right? Because really it's X all the Y is the formula, or I'm going to say verb all the nouns. Oops, all the nouns, because that's just how I understand it. But again, you could call it anything you want as long as you understand what it is. So now I don't want it to say verb all the nouns, right? That's not really the purpose of this generation. So now I need to let it know that verb and noun is actually the name of a rule that's going to have expansions. And I do that by putting hashtags around the name of the rule. So hashtag around verb, hashtag around nouns. Okay. Then I'm actually going to get rid of this actually. So now I have my origin, verb all the nouns, and I need to set up verb and nouns as a rule with expansions. So I'm going to create a new line, tab it in so I can read it a little bit easier. I'm going to name one rule verb, right? So it's referencing directly to this. Okay. Then I'm going to make another rule called nouns. Okay. Then following the syntax of tracery, I'm going to add a colon and then square brackets. And within the square brackets, I'm going to list the options for the verb. Then I'm going to add a comma here because you'll notice we have a comma right here, which is required. So I'm going to do the same thing here. Colon, square brackets, comma. And this is just a workflow that I like, which actually helps set up my syntax. Okay, but so workflow, comma. So what this is basically saying is that we've got an origin rule, which is going to tweet verb all the nouns. And now I'm ready to create specific verbs to fill in right here and specific nouns to fill in right here. Okay. One thing I do want to draw your attention to is that you'll notice that now we have an error. Okay. So this has a fairly robust error checking. And the reason we have an error is because of this comma right here, as we can see right here. Okay. And even though we want an error a comma separating each of our square brackets and each of our rules, because nouns is currently our last rule in the list before the curly bracket, we actually don't want it. So what we want is commas separating each of the rules after the square brackets, except for the last one. And you will see that that same logic is applied within the square brackets for your expansions. So let's think about some verbs. As we said, the verbs that we want are command verbs. So we want, for instance, do. We want eat. We could do watch. We could do read. We could do look at. We could do drink. We could do smell, right? And whatever. We could add lots more. And if I were actually building this bot beyond just as an example for this video, I would add a ton more verbs. Okay, so once we've added all of our expansions, we need to make sure that we have the syntax set. So another rule for tracery syntax is that each expansion needs to be separated by a comma, but that comma needs to go outside the quotation marks. So I'm going to put a comma here, then a comma here, and then not here, again, because this is our last one in the list. Okay, so now whenever we tweet, it's going to, instead of verb, it's going to substitute one of these words. So it's going to say do all the nouns, eat all the nouns, watch all the nouns, right? And now we want to add our nouns. So some plural nouns that we had cookies, we had Netflix shows, we had birds, we had, let's say, water for things we can drink, let's say roses for things we can smell, also flowers. We could say things, so we've got our original, right, and so on. So now we've got some nouns, we've got our verbs, we've got our syntax set, right? We've got commas separating each of our expansions, separating each of our rules, except for the last one. So if we scroll on down, we have no errors, and we can see our bot generate, right? So watch all the things, do all the cookies, do all the flowers, look at all the flowers, drink all the roses, and so on. But as we're generating, we can quickly see that we need to add that level of specificity that I talked about earlier on, right? Because something like smell all the water doesn't really work. So even though it works grammatically and it all works, the code is right, the logic is a little bit broken in terms of what the output is. So especially now, drink all the Netflix shows. So we're going to go up and be a little bit more specific with our rules, right? So I'm going to create some rules down here, and I'm going to call them like do verb, do noun. We'll have an eat noun. So you can see that basically what I've done is added the verb specifically to the word noun to name my rules. All of these are, of course, typos because they're not real words, but Tracery doesn't care. All that matters is that I understand the logic of the rule. So what are some things then that we can do, or what are some nouns that we can do? So we can do things, we can do puzzles, we can do crafts, right, and so on. We can do homework, right, and so on. Again, I could add more. I'm just going to stop now for the purposes of this video. And then we'll fill the same things out for each of these rules. Okay, so now I've set rules that have specific nouns based on what works with each verb. So we have, for our eat nouns, we have things we can eat. For our watch nouns, we have things we can watch, read, things we can read, and so on. Again, this is just a few examples that I've added for the purposes of teaching. If this were a real bot, and probably after this video is done, I'll add a lot more things that can work within here so that it will generate a lot of content and a lot of alternatives. But for now, basically, I just want you to see that I've added this specificity. I've built out everything according to the syntax, so expansions in quotes separated by commas, commas after each square bracket except for the last one, and no commas after the last one in each of our expansions list. Right? So now our next step is that we need to go back to the origin, right, and figure out how we're going to get all of these nouns into the origin, because right now we don't have anything in our origin or in any of our other rules that reference these particular new rules, right? We only have verbs and nouns, so those first two rules being referenced. So even though I've built all of that, if we go back down, you'll see that it's actually not working in the generator yet. Okay, so what we need to do now is we need to make sure that the origin knows how to match the verb with the right nouns, right? So that it all works when the origin tweets things out. And there are a few different ways we can do this, some more complex than others, but I'm just going to show you the simplest way to do it. So the simplest way to do it is to create lots of origin phrases where instead of having verb be generated, we're just going to say specific verbs. So this becomes do all the nouns. Let's give ourselves lots of space where we can kind of see what's going on. Copy that. And then we'll have eat all the nouns, watch all the nouns, and so on, right, all the way down. Okay, so basically what we've done here is we've just said lots of different things from our origin, which are all based on that same logic of do all the things. And now we're going to generate specific nouns. So instead of nouns here, we want do nouns. Here we want eat nouns. Here we want watch nouns, read nouns, look at, drink, and smell. But what you'll notice now is that we actually have one more thing that we need to do. It's still not going to work because this doesn't directly fit with this, right? Here I have this S, which is not here. So I can basically either take the S out here or add it down here. And I'm just going to add it to all these down here. Okay, so now we have verbs with nouns that match, right? We have lots of different origins to tweet within, and we have lots of different rules to generate around. What we actually no longer need now, if you look at our code, is we no longer need these original verb and noun lists, right? Because we're not actually generating randomly within those. So we can just get rid of those to clean up our code. And now we have a nice little do all the things bot generator, right? As you can see, kind of working down here. So I'm going to go on and save this. I'm going to tweet a couple out to make sure that they work. Okay, so now let's check on our bot. And we can see that those things I generated, eat all the bacon, read all the books, read all the articles, are successfully on our bot. So we'll want to check back maybe in 3 hours, make sure that it's still tweeting, but basically it should continue tweeting within the logic that I've set up in our cheap bots done quick. As I said, the model that I've just followed for this code with hard writing all the origins is the simplest way to do it. It is not the most elegant. The more elegant solution would be to use Tracery's grammar saving technique, which I will add images of in case you're interested in what that code looks like. But for now, I'm just going to kind of leave it like this because this is a model that you can all follow. It's a design and iteration process that will work for all of you. And so now I'm going to turn to talking about your assignment specifically. Okay, so now that we have a sense of what a bot is, how to design one, how to work with Tracery, and how to do this all ethically, I just want to say a few things about your assignment specifically. So first, your general assignment is simply to create a Twitter bot using cheap bots done quick and writing the code with Tracery. The bot can be anything you want, but I strongly recommend that you follow the workflow that I've modeled here. And that's modeled in some of the other tutorials for creating a formula with useful expansions. For like kind of breadth requirements, I would like you to try to produce at least 5 rules beyond the origin. Each rule should have a fair number of expansions, but I'm not going to specify a minimum here because depending on the kind of rule that you've set, there may be a limit based on what kind of rule it is, right? So there's only so many, for instance, ways to say yes. So I don't want you to like invent ways to say yes just to reach some minimum. But really the goal here is to have lots of expansions so that there's lots of ways to generate and lots of different things that can come up in the Twitter bot. You should plan to design the profile, so include profile images, include a description, include a cover image, right? And of course, make sure here that everything is ethical and above board, so name it as a bot, give some commentary that makes it clear that it's a bot, and so on. Then when you're done with writing your bot and with writing your Tracery code, please make sure that you set the source code to visible on Cheap Bots Done Quick so that I can check the code that you've written. This is just a good rule of thumb anyway, especially right now while you're building, so that then if you email me because there's troubles with the code, I can see the code and actually help you troubleshoot it, right? So just go on and do that kind of from the beginning, and then that'll really make everything a bit better as we go. You will write a designer statement where you talk about the process of creating your bot as usual. And then when you submit this, you will link to the Twitter account that your bot runs on, and then upload your designer statement as a PDF as usual. And all of this is due next Wednesday, April 22nd at 11:59 p.m. Okay, so that's basically your focus for the week. I'm going to close by just giving you a couple of tips for working with Twitter, because Twitter's kind of can be a little bit goofy. So first, you'll have to create an account for your bot on Twitter that needs to not be your personal account. And as you all know, accounts are based on individual phone numbers or email accounts. So first, do not sign up with your phone. It will default to a phone number, but there is a little button at the bottom that says use email instead, and do that. Okay, because otherwise, if you already have a Twitter account, it's not going to let you sign up if you already have the phone number or email associated with another account. Okay, so use email. And then if you have a Gmail account, there's a cool trick you can do to basically use your same Gmail inbox, but make Twitter think it's a different account. And that is that you will do your Gmail account, and then before you will put a plus sign, and then anything you want. So for instance, my Gmail account is swlozier@gmail.com. And for this X all the Y bot option, I've made it SWL plus all the things at gmail.com, right? So now Twitter thinks this is a different account, but it's going to go right to my personal Gmail inbox, so I don't have to create a new email account just for this bot, right? So that's a cool trick you can do with Gmail. Finally, when you set up the account, you will have to set an age for your bot. Do not set your bot for the day that you create it. Twitter's going to lock it down real fast because it's too young to be on the internet. So make sure that your bot is at least 18 years old. Right? I think I just set all mine to 1980 just to be super sure. So make sure that your bot is an adult, right? Otherwise, Twitter's not going to let it go. And then finally, as I said before, make sure that it doesn't tweet more than every 3 hours, because that seems to be kind of the sweet spot where users appreciate it and Twitter doesn't kind of shut you down. Okay, so that's Twitter bots, and I hope you guys have fun with this. This is, as I've said, like traditionally a very popular assignment. It's one of my favorites. It's one of my favorite ways to close out this semester. So I hope that you all have some fun with it, and I am here for any help, any guidance with the code, with the ideas, with the logic, anything at all. Please don't hesitate to reach out, and keep taking care of yourselves, and I will look forward to seeing your bots.